David, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you.
There's a couple things I wanted to ask you, and we've had the pleasure of a couple of chats before today. And one of the things that struck me is the AML sanctions community continues to expand both in terms of entities that are covered, which has included the gaming industry for quite a long period of time. And you're obviously very familiar with that industry, and we'll talk about it. So we've had an expansion of what I would consider non-traditional financial institutions. But even for financial institutions, one of the areas that we constantly struggle with, and I can say this as being somebody who's been involved in it for over 30 years and don't have the technology experience, has been cyber issues and cybersecurity. And one of the things that struck me about what you do is the notion of IP addresses as a valuable potential data point in terms of filing of SARs. But I come to that very much as, FinCEN produces something, you see that, and you know that banks have said, yeah, we got to make sure that we fill out the SARs, we put that in there. But you have a different take on this. And I'd like you to talk a bit about geolocation technology, talk about the deficiencies of just simply IP addresses, because I think it's fascinating what you and your company and your colleagues have been working on for a bit.
Sure. I guess I should start by saying it. I mean, IP technology is one that has been, incredibly well used. I mean, since the start of the internet, people have been using an IP address to work out where you are, to help make a website be in the right language, to help identify who someone is by saying, okay, well, we've seen that IP address before. It's in the same town as we understand someone's address to be in. It's probably them. And it's made its way into the logic of, I think, just about every digital application you can think of, ranging from Netflix to your bank account, to PayPal, to doing your tax returns or your email account, calendar, everything that you do on the web has some part of an important part of its logic of establishing who you are and what you want is based on your IP address and the derived logic that people have around IP addresses and location. And that's been just part of the internet for 20 years.
Right.
And we founded our company 8 years ago because of a specific use case where IP address geolocation would just not work anymore. And that use case was the very strange world of US regulated gambling on the internet,
sure,
or iGaming as we call it, where if you take a state like DC, which is going online for sports betting quite soon. 1 minute you're in Maryland where you can't bet online. 1 minute you're in Virginia, you can't bet online. Next minute you're in DC, and those minutes were not very far apart because it's such a small place, right?
Sure.
And we were invited to create a geofencing system that would work for that kind of use case. Because in the world of iGaming, if you take a bet or someone buys a lottery ticket or you submit a daily fantasy sport roster from a state which it's not legal to do so, even if you are 10 yards away from the border of a state that does allow it, if you happen to be 10 yards the wrong side of the state border, it's a federal crime with a penalty of 5 years in jail for the operator of that lottery or daily fantasy sports or gaming site. And 5 years in jail for the payment method used by the patron. So, the payments world is really sucked into this challenge, and we looked at how we could do it, and you can't do it with an IP address. And the reasons you can't do it with an IP address, as we sort of worked out 8 years ago, are as true now as they were then, which is that an IP address is very rarely accurate to within, I don't know, let's say half a mile or something.
Right.
Sometimes it could be thousands of miles. And if you are a fraudster and you want to fake it, it's the easiest thing in the world. People turn on VPNs all the time. And it's hard to believe there's any criminal gangs out there that don't do what they do behind a battery of VPNs and virtual machines in data centers all over the world. And then the last point, which really questioned how on earth the world of financial compliance can still rely on IP addresses for KYC and anti-money laundering. That the last point is that any mobile traffic that you get as a bank, you have users that are accessing your website via a 3G connection or 5G or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That IP address has nothing to do with the location of the device at all. Nothing. So, John, if you go in the old days when we used to be able to travel, right. If you were on a trip to, Munich or something, and you were roaming, if you wanted to access your bank account whilst out of the country, that bank account would look at the IP address and think that you were still home in Virginia, because your account is probably with a local cell carrier there, and it's got an IP address based on its head office, and wherever you go in the world, it'll always have that IP address. And something like 48% of the world's data traffic now is over cell towers. So what you're basically facing in terms of all the logic that the cybersecurity industry has built around IP addresses, it can either be completely easily spoofed by criminal gangs, or even more easily spoofed by someone buying a SIM card with all-you-can-eat internet data access from the US, shipping it anywhere in the world, and then suddenly you look like you're in the US.
So, go ahead. Go ahead, finish. Yep.
Yeah, so the whole thing is that the whole logic of compliance built on an IP address makes no sense at all. It's a house made of straw with a big, very puffy wolf outside.
So I get the example on online gaming. That makes perfect sense to me about jurisdictional oversight, because of the way as you point out, the U.S. laws are sort of screwy that way, where in some states it's illegal, some states it's not. But the notion of, I think, what you guys have called location jumping, or discrepancies between the IP location and the device location, give me a money laundering related example. And you have given me a couple of ideas in this space, but what I'm interested in is, this seems so logical to me that this is more than just a problem. What has law enforcement said to you when you've raised this? Not so much, again, about your product, but the whole notion of using this technology. I know you've reached out, I think, in writing to Director Blanco at FinCEN, but give me a money laundering or terrorist financing related example where this location jumping or discrepancies between the IP location and device location presents additional lack of a better term, red flags for suspicious activity.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple actually that have come out quite recently. The first one is BitMEX, which is a crypto exchange. Right. And the CFTC publicly reported its investigation into BitMEX, saying that they had allowed people to access BitMEX from the US when BitMEX wasn't licensed and approved by the CFTC. And there's also an investigation going on in regard to people accessing from nations under sanctions. So this is all publicly reported, and they were able to access BitMEX, according to the investigation, how it was reported, via VPNs. So you have the whole concept of, if you take the whole concept of sanctions and say, okay, you cannot transact with North Korea, you cannot transact with Syria.
Right.
And then someone goes to one of those two countries, turns on a VPN into the US, and hey, presto, you can transact. Mm-hmm. So any platform that has to comply with, this mandate to block nations under sanctions should be blocking VPNs or have geo-fencing protocols which are at least fit for purpose. But if you can get straight through them with a SIM card bought from, Best Buy or a VPN, then clearly you don't have any defenses, at which point, well, what are we doing? Are these rules there for a purpose or not? And there's another example which came up, and one of the reasons I think maybe these kind of issues are it's kind of obvious and yet nothing changes, is that some of the technicalities, when you get into them, people just tune out. It all seems a bit complex and weird.
Right.
And but I'll try with this one, and just bear with me.
Sure.
So there was a case of a company called MICFO, and MICFO was based in South Carolina. And what it was doing was it was buying IP addresses from the central IP registrar for the US, and it would create all these pretend companies effectively and say, hey, we need these IP addresses. This is what we're doing. And this, registrar would basically say, okay, fine, that seems great. Here you go. Here is 750,000 IP addresses for these businesses. And then MICFO would go and sell those IP addresses for, massive multiples of what they just got them from to basically cyber fraudsters who would then conduct all kinds of nefarious phishing scams and awful spam campaigns and all kinds of horrible, dirty tricks on the internet, masquerading under these IP addresses, which had basically been stolen and fenced by an entity called MICFO. And the FBI basically eventually, put two and two with different investigations going on and said, hey, this shouldn't be happening. They went to proceed against MICFO, and that case is still going through the courts. But you can start to see that don't mean this to be a pun, but the net is kind of tightening on the abuse which has been happening for a while, seemingly unchecked. And I think the reason it's unchecked is that very few people either get how easy it is to fake someone because you can just get around an IP address logic, and secondly, a lot of people don't want to deal with the fact that IP addresses shouldn't be trusted for compliance reasons because their entire systems kind of rely on an IP address being trustworthy.
Sure.
So if you take that away, that ends up being a massive amount of re-engineering at a solution architect level from the very bottom up of the security platforms and security logic.
Well, that leads me to the question, the additional question I had about reaching out to law enforcement, because that being the case as you've laid out, the fact that FinCEN had indicated in a recent guidance to include IP addresses because there would be value there, if what you say is true, which I'm sure that it is, what does that do to the validity of that data point that obviously can easily be circumvented? And what, if anything, that you can share, of course, has FinCEN or law enforcement in general said about that? You said the FBI is looking at this now, but that would seem to, I don't say negate, but it certainly adds a lot of caveats around the notion that if you include an IP address in the SAR, you're thinking that it's providing important value add, but perhaps not.
I guess I'm a bit of an outsider here in terms of what I think should be happening, because it looks to me like the system is illogical and not working properly. But I guess there's many people out there who would say, no, it's all working fine, and what I'm saying is over the top. But I think realistically speaking, if for Director Blanco to come out and say, include an IP address in a SARS, I mean, it's great that he's saying it now, because if they weren't saying it before, they really have been missing the trick.
Right.
But I think where this has to go, I think we just can forget about what's been done in the past. It's been done in the past, how it is. Let's just start, let's say 10 years into the future. Now, in 10 years into the future, if someone is transacting on whatever device, whether it's, embedded in their body, they're wearing it on their wrist, it's, a huge, great fridge in their kitchen that they're doing whatever they're doing on. Now, let's say whatever it is. Every single device will know your location to within about 25, 30 yards, pretty much anywhere in the planet. Okay. Right. And that location data has just as IP addresses has proven, has a large part to play in the KYC question of, is that a real person? Is that the person who's meant to be transacting on this account? Are they coming in from a territory where they're allowed to be doing what they're doing? And I think it's fairly logical that if you're a CISO or a CTO and you're looking at solution architecting your business, you'd say, yes, let's use the proper location data in order to make the right kind of question, to ask the right questions and have the right engine to take that data and make a good decision. Not like a crypto exchange that says they're based one place and then actually gets loads of traffic from the US or from nations under sanctions. That shouldn't happen, right? So how do you go from where we are now to this kind of utopia, which is where, well, if I'm doing something on my iPhone knows where I am. Why doesn't the bank app on my iPhone know where I am? Why is it that when I'm traveling with the iPhone in my pocket and my credit card in my hand, and I'm trying to pay for dinner in Italy and the card gets declined because the bank says they don't know where I am, even though the bank app's on my phone? And that bank app could know where I was within 25 yards, but it isn't even asking for location. It's the only app on my phone that doesn't ask for location. I mean, we have to go from where we are to there. And the reality is none of that utopia in 10 years' time is actually impossible now. It's all possible now. Like, we've already done it for the gaming industry. We know exactly where you are within 25 yards. And if you're coming in from the wrong place, you can't transact. And if you're not the real person on that account, we also spot that. So it's possible now. I just do not know for the life of me why the cybersecurity industry just has ignored location data and how it's evolved over the last 10 years. It's beyond me.
Yeah, but you must have some idea why, right? Because you've talked to enough folks. And again, I'm not looking for proprietary conversations, but I'm always interested, going back all the years I've done this, there definitely have been some companies and some technologies. This is my characterization, of course, being a lawyer and a non-techie. The company would come in to any institution or law enforcement entity and say, if you do this, this is what you'll be able to track or investigate or whatever. And there's always this internal good to have, need to have. So if an institution thinks, again, not talking about your product specifically, but that something is good to have, but they don't need it, is it more because of the regulatory infrastructure that we have, that this is not seen as a necessity? Or is it just because it's not nascent, you've been doing it for a while, it's just people have to sort of get to the point where they understand. I understand your example about sanctions. That's pretty simple to grasp. The online stuff, pretty simple to grasp. But the notion of getting more institutions interested in the value of the data point, is it just more of a question of outreach awareness? Or again, is it more what you alluded to a couple of minutes ago, where you said sort of the way we're structured in terms of the Bank Secrecy Act and AML, that's part of the stumbling block? What's your take on this? I'm curious, because obviously you've not been in this forever, but you obviously have an interesting angle here besides your company's angle. Why do you think this is?
Well, I guess there's three possible reasons. I mean, obviously it's not because there's a shortage of intelligence or technical expertise in the world of banking. I mean, they have some really great technologists and some really smart people. It's not that. Every single person making decisions from a cybersecurity perspective in the banking industry in the US uses geolocation on their phones 50 times a day, right? They clearly know the technology. So why is it that they use it every single day? They understand it, they think, oh, this is cool, this is great. And they don't ever think, hey, maybe we should put this into our app. Maybe that would give us some good data. Maybe that would help us. So why has that not happened? So my guess, again, as an outsider, and actually, to be honest, John, I'd love if your audience, get some sort of communication going in on this, because I'd love their thoughts.
Sure.
I'm just an opinionated Brit on the outside. I might have this completely wrong. Right. But my best guess, three reasons. One, what you can say about the fintech world over the last 10 years is that they've made an enormous amount of money and the investors are very, very happy with them. So no one could argue that they're doing a terrible job because the stocks continue to rise and they all make loads of money, right? So that's they're not an industry in crisis or suffering. Second one, consumers unfortunately have such low expectations of the user experience and customer satisfaction from their bank or their credit card, that actually they don't expect the banks to have like any kind of geolocation logic that would make either the customer's life easier or make them safer. And it's worth saying, by the way, that the latest research is that the vast majority of people want their location to be shared with the apps, and particularly if that will make them safer. Right. So that is actually the consumer environment, which I think the consumers want it, but they don't expect the banks to give it to them because they're just they've given up, right? They've given up expecting to be delighted by their bank. And therefore, no one is like switching around or complaining about geolocation not being good enough. Now, if one bank suddenly did a fantastic job, that might change, right? And you do see advertising that says you never need to call your bank again when you go away on holiday. So it's clearly something that is a source of irritation to consumers, but I don't think no one bank has really got on top of it. So that's the consumer. There's no consumer demand. And then the last piece, and this is the one where the regulators that might be listening to this podcast won't like it very much, is that the regulators haven't asked for the banks to upgrade their technologies from IP addresses alone. And so if you're making a decision inside a bank, I don't think there's enough ticks in that decision-making process where they decide to deploy capital or put something on their development pipeline. There's just not enough ticks on that internal memo to say, okay, well, we know IP addresses is pretty poor for what we're using it for, but should we upgrade it now or do we wait a couple of years? Yeah. And I think it just ends up waiting a couple of years. Yeah, and unfortunately, where we've got to today, if I'm right, and I might be completely wrong, is that there is an enormous amount of fraud that happens, and that's money going to bad actors, because it's so easy to break down the doors into someone's account because you've been able to steal their credentials on the dark web, or buy their credentials on the dark web because someone else has stolen it. And it's easy to then get through the next check, which is, well, are you actually coming in from Belarus or are you coming in from, Michigan? And if it's so easy to pretend to be from Michigan, you just get around that check and then you're into the account and you're done. And what we've learned from the iGaming space is that everyone assumes that real money iGaming is going to be full of fraud. And actually there's virtually none. I think we're at something like 0.1% of all purchases are lost to fraud, like 0.1%. And from the guys that we work with at WorldPay who handle a lot of that market, they say it is the least, it is the safest category. It has the least amount of fraud of all the categories that they support online. And part of that is that if a fraudster can't break through the geofence, right, they just don't get in. They never make it into the system. And so the upside, and this is what I would say to the regulators I do talk to, is like security can only get better once you start to embrace better geolocation technologies. It's better data. It's so much more reliable. It gives you so many more things. And I just think we're making life far too easy for the fraudsters right now.
Yeah, I think going back to your comment on the regulators, I get that point, but I can tell you, sort of being an insider, that they're very reluctant to mandate anything. So it's more, they want to, as you know, they've encouraged innovation. They've certainly done more outreach to see if there's some best practices that work. And I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, I think in general, because of the scope of our industry being mid-sized, small, and large institutions, that other than that, and sort of shining a light on here's some additional things you could do, they're very reluctant to encourage a particular type of technology. But, that's a separate debate. David Briggs, you're the CEO, co-founder of GeoGuard and GeoComply. Sort of one last point I want to get to, and that is in the COVID-19 environment that we're in, how is your technology, how can it be useful to the frauds and the issues there? I've talked to a lot of some of your peers and colleagues, people in the AML space that have talked about their struggles in these past several months. What is it that you folks are doing, if anything, that's dealing with the pandemic side effects or collateral damage, if you will?
Well, we are doing everything we can to try and upgrade the defenses that many of the e-commerce merchants out there currently have to protect them against fraud. And it's just such a huge vertical. And as you say, it's just where do you start? So
Right.
what we've done is we've focused on the PayFac space, so the digital merchant acquirers who are basically trying to compete to get merchants to transact, to use them to take credit cards online. And in that space, it's so competitive that they try and onboard a merchant super fast, and
Right.
they do it in seconds, and they don't really have the scope for the kind of paper chase that you would need to do to make sure that someone is who they say they are, that it's a real business, that the person they're talking to owns that business, and the transactions that are going to come through are real. And what we're saying to them, and we're providing our services free of charge to PayFacs as a way of helping them, because a lot of the fraud is going to hurt these small businesses that are rushing online and rushing to take, let's say, takeaway meals from your restaurants online, which they've never done before.
Right.
And we're providing service to a free access to our API for detection of data center connections, VPNs, in the hope that they will at least check that. And the scary thing is, every single PayFac we've spoken to that onboards new merchants online that they have never met, never spoken to, and they have putting hundreds of thousands of dollars in transactions through, days and weeks after they've signed up. Not a single one is checking to see if this new merchant that's signing up is on a VPN. And the reason we focus on this sector is people started coming to us and saying, "Can you help us? We're dealing with this investigation." And I'm saying to them, these merchants, you think they're in New York, that's a VPN. They could be anywhere in the world. That's how you've been hoodwinked, part of how you've been hoodwinked. So we're trying to give it to them for free. It is still IP address-based technology. It's not where they should be, but it's where they can get to more easily. And the scary thing is how few of them are even checking to see if a connection's a VPN. So hopefully if they do that, they'll be a little bit safer, and that will reduce some of the fraud that's going to happen to these merchants.
Well, David Briggs, thanks so much for giving us some time today, giving us a lot to think about. Stay safe. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch soon.